It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day listeners and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 150, Cause for Raising the Bat. I think we've done a few more than that, to be honest. But joining me, as usual, of course, let me intro him, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
Good. I was just reading this morning your piece in The Australian, and I was particularly taken with the Midsomer murders bit. I was always a fan of Midsomer murders on Friday night television.
Sure, mate.
The real beauty of it was that it didn't matter whether you stayed for an extra couple of beers at the pub but before coming home, because there was always a fresh murder to be solved when you walked in there.
Yes, can you imagine the murder rate in Midsomer Murders, or in Midsomer, the fictitious county? That was all in my column today about the ABC strike and what have you. We'll deal with that a little bit later. Last week, for our regular listeners, would have been aware that we did a little bit of a departure. We started looking at media consumption and we talked about political affiliation, and we're just going to follow up on that a little bit. Well, why don't you lead it off, Jack?
We were talking last week about, and you expressed some incredulity when you said that I didn't. When I said I thought that my views on politics hadn't much changed, but the Labor Party had moved much more than I had, right? And I still think that's reasonably true. My views aren't very different to what they were in 1983 at the beginning of the Hawke government, but there are a couple
43 years ago, Jack. There's been a fair bit happened since then.
Yeah, but there are a couple of things that even I would say that are notable differences. If I go back to that time, I was a great believer in government as a way to fix things, you know. I can remember myself and a lot of my friends used to always insist upon flying Australian Airlines because it was the people's airline, right?
Yeah, my mum used to do that. You know, we were restricted to sort of government-owned enterprises. You know,
yes,
like
yeah.
Like there was some sort of payoff at the end of this. You know,
there may have been another factor, is that a friend of ours used to work for the Australian Airlines out at Tullamarine, and if you bought a standby ticket, you could be very confident that you would be on a plane.
Yeah,
right?
The old standby routines. Yeah, remember that.
Yeah.
Got out of Queensland on one of those. Very lucky we all felt.
Yeah, yes. I think it might have been the same chap organising that. In fact, I'm certain it was. But my views about how good government was at doing stuff like that changed when I had a look under the bonnet. You know, when I had a look at places like Telecom. Remember the old Telecom?
I was talking to my daughter about this the other day. I can go back to the PMG if you like, mate.
Yeah. And I had to have a good look at Telecom as a result of a few court cases, and I came away with a much diminished faith in the ability of government to deliver on some services.
That was a particular disaster, and no doubt you would have been well accustomed to my bleating about the state of internet speeds in this country, and particularly in regional Australia, which it was distinctly poor. So we had essentially a monopoly, a government-owned monopoly, that was then opened up by way of public float, mums and dads shareholders and all that sort of stuff. By the way, if you bought Telstra shares, you haven't made a lot of money. I think they were about $2 on the float, and they're about $4 now, aren't they? So it's not hasn't been a great thing. But once that float was done, Telstra then, formerly Telecom, still owned all of our telecommunications infrastructure. And that was a monopoly. And then they had to deal with that, and they had to fling Telstra billions of dollars by way of compensation in order to access that infrastructure to create the NBN. Now, things have, I think, worked out reasonably well in terms of just by that test of regional Australia's access to the internet and just general universal access to the internet in Australia. But we certainly we went around a long way, didn't we? And that was all driven by government and the need for money.
Yes, yeah, that's right. The other area I think where my views have changed, I'm much more fond of the defence of Western civilization, and I have very little respect now for human rights lawyers, and that's because I spent 10 years looking at failed states and why they failed. In the course of
what are we talking about here, Jack?
Oh, no, just all sorts of cases. I spent 10 years looking at refugee cases, which basically means you're looking at the sort of countries where people are persecuted.
Ah, yes, I see. Yep.
And in my view, that means they're kind of failed states, right? You know, they are failing their own people, right?
Yeah.
So, as well as looking at the individual people, you're also looking at, well, there's patterns here. Why are some states failed states, right? And why are so many states failed states? And that led me to a conclusion that Western civilization was worth defending.
I couldn't agree more. I'm actually very pleased to hear it because you're not a fan of the Europeans, but that's where the fight is.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about immigration and things like that. We'll get to Europe shortly in the show. But
I'm not a fan of the EU. I'm a fan of Europeans as people and as a culture. I just don't think they're prepared to defend it. It's my problem with it.
I think there's been a lot of change, obviously. See, I would look at the American political system, the democratic system, as failed. And I've mentioned this before. Trump is a symptom, not the disease, of a sort of, well, there's lots of reasons for this, but the primary one is this almost sort of inculcation of the two-party system, against the will of the people. So very base level, 40% of voter registrants in the United States are independents. They don't have a candidate. So you can, in a presidential election. So you can imagine that's the start of the problems. It came a little bit later where super PACs and bad bloody a SCOTUS decision allowed enormous amounts of money to come through. And the other thing is, of course, that those red and blue states govern themselves with a view to keeping themselves in power and their parties in power federally, and that often leads to gerrymanders, these sorts of things. I mean, we've seen it in Texas, seen it in California. That system needs to be reformed. But one thing I do believe in, just a moment, is that we have a very robust, strong democracy based on three very sound principles, and that is compulsory voting, a independent, an electoral commission independent of government, and the third element is essential. Well, now is compulsory preferential voting, and I think that keeps us strong, particularly compulsory voting. We're like a number of nations who have compulsory voting. We're one of the few rare ones who actually police it. There's a little bit of policing going on with fines being sent out and what have you. But I think once you have mandatory voting, everyone's engaged. Everyone, technically at least, it has a slice of the pie in determining the outcome. And I think that's what makes our democracy stronger than it is in, let's say, the United States or in the UK or in even New Zealand. I saw some bloke reckons he looked at the South Australian election results, which we're about to do, and said, if they use the New Zealand quota preferential system, one nation would have got 10 seats and yeah, sure, mate. The New Zealand system is hardly perfect, and it is incredibly complex and silly in that it's seat-based, but it's also national-based, and And it doesn't always deliver good outcomes, and I think you only need to ask New Zealanders for their opinion on that. So I think our democracy is very strong. When you ask about movement, I think that there is a sort of a personal delusion in that, not you, but people generally feel that they haven't changed and things around them have. I was sort of asking myself that question, whether I thought my politics had changed or whether the politics around me had changed. And I'm still not quite sure about the answer. Like I say, there is a sort of hidden delusion in all of this. As I said to you before, Bill Leake maintained that he hadn't changed from the old lefty he was to becoming, quite strident conservative. And he sort of said, I haven't changed. My politics haven't changed. I said, yes, they have, mate. I mean, it's measurable. Where it comes down to that, to me, I'm not sure. I sort of have a number of fundamental beliefs. And one of, it sounds like kumbaya stuff, but every child born in this country should have a crack, right? They should have access to education. They should have access to public health. They should have access to social services. And so they have within a very we know that there are things like socioeconomic status that are pretty much going to determine outcomes, but really this is what the state should be aiming for, that everyone has a quality of opportunity, and that means the provision of services around the place. I despise middle-class welfare, Jack, and I think you do too. I think it's, we call it middle-class welfare, but it really is in the upper echelons that people are receiving large amounts of money from the government, where you would make a very strong argument that they don't need it. Just on CGT discounts and negative gearing, Jack, that costs around $20 billion a year at the moment. So you've got to ask yourself, and look, the problem with our politics, we have a strong, robust democracy, but the parties themselves are not inclined to go to the people. I think that's the lesson Labor learned from Shorten in 2019, is that if you go to the people with even a fairly timid sort of reform agenda, you get knocked off. And that's part of the problem. The media is responsible for that. Obviously, their political opponents are to a large degree too. But it makes reform very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, and I think that it's sort of a truism in politics that Labor governments can make change in areas like industrial relations, et cetera, that a Liberal government can't get away with. And it's also true that the Liberal governments can do things in corporate areas that Labor can't get away with. That's certainly true. Just, I want to tell you something about, I was talking to a mate about voter registration in the United States. And this fella's grew up in the south side of Chicago. And you have to disclose your voter registration in Illinois. Yeah. And the problem with that is in the south side, if you lived in the south side of Chicago, right, and you disclosed that you were registered as a Republican, there's no way you get the pothole in front of your street fixed, right? In front of your house fixed, right?
Yeah. But the same goes in the inverse in states like Tennessee and Louisiana, What I find interesting, Jack, is that when we look at these sort of social indicators around, just basic stuff around infant mortality, around education levels, etc., it's always the South that comes last. From memory, I think Mississippi is the worst of the 50 states in terms of educational outcomes.
No, that's just no longer true.
Well, it certainly is according to the data I looked at.
I've looked at it very recently, and I
was just about a week or so ago. So in terms of basic literacy, which is being assessed by compulsorily in the states, throughout the states, these red states continue to underperform. They're the ones dragging down the United States in terms of public health, in terms of you look across the states in infant mortality, Jack, and it's always these red states that have got the worst outcomes.
Infant mortality, I think that's right, but I'll send you what I read on, and we can discuss it next week if you like,
let's do that.
On literacy and numeracy, and that certainly has been the case, but I don't think it is any longer.
Okay, well, we'll set that aside for next week. But, look, it's an interesting exercise. I think everyone needs to sort of pause and reflect on what their politics are about. And certainly we're both at a ripe old age ourselves. You sort of can sort of trick yourself into thinking, I'm still a radical lefty, but that's very rarely the case.
The other thing, can I say about the 10 years looking at failed states, is that I lost all faith in human rights lawyers and all that kind of stuff, because I had previously thought that they made a real difference to outcomes. And then looking at, all of a sudden you start looking at the constitutions of other countries written by eminent Western human rights lawyers. The South African one's a great example. And it doesn't lead to any improvement in human rights situations. The thing that protects human rights are the basic things like representative government, the rule of law.
In places like this, sound land laws or estate laws.
The right to own
property safely, knowing that it won't be stolen by government at some particular point.
Yeah. So where you've got those basic things, it doesn't matter what the human rights laws say. You'll have protection of human rights. And if you haven't got those things, no amount of fancy human rights law is going to make a jot of difference, really. I listen to people who, to people from all over the world explain to me the importance of what the rule of law was and how that worked. And they did a better job of it than any lawyer I knew in Melbourne.
Okay. All right. Well, we shall have a look at the United States educational outcomes across the 50 states. But before we move, we'll go straight to the South Australian election, Jack. There are now 4 seats in doubt, only 4 seats in doubt. 3 of those has One Nation ahead. I would caution. I would say the FON will probably win 2 of those, and the Libs will retain the others, because the Libs, although they are battling, they still have a pretty superior postal vote mechanism or administration around it. So that's what I'm thinking that will be. As the way it stands with the 4, the ABC is saying 5 in doubt, but it's really 4. And Labor will have 33 seats. That's an increase of 6. Libs back to 4. One Nation is only at 1, likely to be 3. Libs maybe 5 or 6. Let me have a look at that in terms of the 5 they've identified. Libs ahead in Hasten. Yeah, McKillop will probably be a One Nation pickup. Morphett, Labor is ahead there. They should pick that up. So that will give them, I think, 34 seats. The Libs maybe 5 or 6. One Nation probably 3, with others at around 4 independents essentially. Look, there's been a lot of, I think, bullshit written about the orange tsunamis, and gee whiz, it was like watching reporters reach for their thesauruses looking for various natural disasters to describe this. So, of course, we have landslide victories, Jack. You know, everything in politics is around natural disasters. So we have a tsunami and all this sort of stuff. Yes, the Libs vote has almost collapsed, and One Nation has fit that. It's essentially just taken it all. I just want to have a look at what I wrote about this a little while ago, and when we look at the primary vote, Jack, and there are differences in seat to seats and all that sort of stuff, but overall, when we look at the state seats, then not seats, I should say. When we talk about primary voting, it seems like almost all of that Liberal vote has gone to One Nation. A couple of minor parties who used to fare a little bit better, like Family First, have dropped 1%. The Greens went up by 1 point, and Labor, who were at 40% in the 2022 election, are now at just on 38. So they've lost about 1 or 2%, but managed to pick up 6 seats. And I think the real lesson for everyone here is that, and I've said this before, I've written this before, where One Nation steals Liberal votes, Labor wins. It's just the way it's going to be, and I think people are going to wake up to this. A lot of commenters in the Australian have been saying, "Oh, well, once we get preference deals and so forth organised, it'll be the end of Labor and all this sort of stuff." And you go, "That's not even close to where you're going to be." For a start, voters vote the way they want to vote, not the way the how to vote card tells them to vote. So you will see a number of voters, probably about 20% of South Australians, for example, who might have voted One Nation, might have put Labor 2, or indeed ahead of the Liberals. And that's part of this sort of what we call preference leakage, that basically gets Labor over the line and will every time. Yeah, there's been some significant losses around certain seats. You might want to have a look at some of them, Jack, in terms of Labor, or what they might call blue-collar seats. Big swings there. I was looking at, was it Light, the seat of Light, where there's a big swing. Labor will hold it now. It was in the doubtful column for a while, but there was, I think, a 19% swing against Labor.
Well, just looking at the Labor vote, this actually franked Cos Samaris's piece that we talked about, I think, 2 weeks ago, right? That there had been, not just in Australia, but around the world, that there had been, that the progressive parties, the left parties, had lost votes from one area of the community and gained from another. I can't recall an election like this one, just looking at the Labor vote in South Australia, where the same party has suffered swings of 10 or 15% against it and had 10 or 17% in one case swings to it.
Yeah, I think it was 18.
Yeah. Swings to it, right? I think that's the one that Nick Bolkus' daughter won.
Yes.
Was an 18% swing.
New members.
Yeah. So that's a really unusual election in that regard. I just can't recall that ever happening before, where the same party.
What we are seeing, Jack. I mean, just putting the sort of One Nation metaphors, man-made or natural disaster metaphors aside for one moment. What we are seeing is the emergence of two Australias in political terms and socioeconomic terms. Paul Kelly suggested that the One Nation, the rise in their support might actually be a blessing in disguise for Jacinda Allen in Victoria.
It could keep her in government.
It could keep her in power. I don't think so, because I think what you're talking about, Jack, is that a lot of these safe Labor seats in Victoria are the ones that are going to go.
Yes.
And they might go to One Nation, or they might go independent, or they might. There will be huge swings against them. That's what I'm tipping in terms of what we would call traditional Labor areas. Now, there are people who are saying that the status quo of Labor v the coalition, with a few minor parties on either side of them making up the numbers, that they don't have political representation. And I think that's the reason for the rise in One Nation. Whether people will say, well, Hanson's hasn't budged an inch on immigration and things like that. I mean, she's budged much more than an inch on tax policy for a start. You remember the 10% flat rate, Jack? You remember that?
I vaguely recall it. She pushed that. Yes.
It did not add up. But yes, look, on immigration, I think there are some real pressures that occurred. I know the Libs, they are their own worst enemy in so many ways. Now they're talking about immigration levels being too high. When they were in government, they put the rubber stamp on 500,000 people coming into the country after, it must be said, 2 years of virtually no immigration at all.
Yeah, of COVID, yes.
With the pandemic. Now, Labor could have changed that when they came into government in 2022, but they didn't. So there were significant pressures placed on infrastructure, property prices, those sorts of things, property availability, rental availability, and what have you. The people are still a bit. People are still very frustrated about. I'm not sure that. Well, I know that One Nation has zero answers for any of this. So I suspect a lot of this is kind of look at me, not look at, but will someone please listen to me type voting because these guys aren't listening to me at the moment. How sustainable it is for One Nation, I don't know. We'll know more the Farrabee election will help us a little bit. I still think the independent there's got the rails running, and we'll know a bit more again in Victoria, which is, as John Howard famously said, the Massachusetts of Australia.
Just looking at the One Nation vote, right? One Nation, I think it was back in 1998 in Queensland. One Nation got
23% of the vote.
Of the vote, right? At the next election in Queensland, it got 9%. And in the one after that, it got 5%.
Yeah. And perhaps more importantly, Jack, and we do congratulate David Payton, who is the recently elected, the only confirmed One Nation member of the lower house in the seat of, and I apologise, Engajuri. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but it's a regional seat about 100 kilometres north around Gawler or Gawler River.
Can't you speak South Australian?
Okay, well, there was some odd stuff. Payton was handing out how to vote cards with the old seat's name, and it obviously had been changed. There'd been redistributions and so forth, so they renamed it. But quite recently, and I don't know if he was taking the piss or whether he was genuinely confused about it all. But we congratulate him. But what happened in Queensland in 1998, Jack, is I think from memory, with that 23% of the vote, One Nation had 11 members in the unicameral House in Queensland, and by the end of that year, all but one had gone, had all defected.
Yes. Yeah.
And that tells you that one person can't run a party because they're going to stuff it up, right? They're going to be personality clashes that people are going to say, what about me? What, why don't I have the ability to make my own judgments on policy? And if it's all being handed down from on high from Pauline Hanson, then, the thing will blow up.
Yeah, their record is that they're unable to hold that together. And I'm not saying it's guaranteed that will happen again, but I think it's more likely than not.
More likely than not. So we do keep an eye on David Payton. Jack, I give him a year. How long do you give him? He storms out and goes and sits on the crossbenches as an indie.
He should relax and enjoy himself because he's probably going to be one term because that's the other history of your thing. Yeah. So he's not going to get a pension, but just enjoy the perks for 3 years and relax.
Now, when I say when One Nation votes rise at the expense of the Liberal Party, the Labor wins. That's absolutely true. But what do we say about the Libs, Jack? I mean, what hope do they have?
Well, I think the history of One Nation is that they won't stay where they are.
Right.
So the future for the Libs is: are they capable of
being a party of government?
Yeah. Are they capable of getting their act together enough to
not looking good.
Have some kind of brand structure, to pre-select winnable candidates, just all the basics you've got to do in a political party? Have they lost the capacity to do that? And if they have, something else will come along and replace them.
Yeah, and well, I was going to say, I've been sort of predicting the demise of the coalition, and Liberal Party in particular, for some time, going back even pre-2019 when they won the unwinnable. But when we start to look at this, you know, the Liberal Party disappears, and people like my father, for example, might have said, this is a bloody good thing, the enemy's gone. But the alternative could be a whole lot worse. And even if we say One Nation might fall apart, I mean, God knows what follows that. But there are some people, you know, there's a large number of people who probably wouldn't affiliate with the hard right who have these beliefs. The other thing I want to talk about, Jack, is that, you know, any sort of analysis of the history of this country will tell you that there is a rather large stripe of xenophobia here, and that when there are pressures placed on the country with immigration and what have you, housing, that sort of thing does flare up. And now we know immigration levels are down off the top of my head to around about 180,000 this year, not counting New Zealanders. You'll see these stresses start to ease a little bit too, but there is that unfortunate sense, talking to a few people myself who might be inclined to vote One Nation or generally vote Liberal, you know, coming up with some, you know, straight out racist stuff, you know.
Well, if you look at the history of the White Australia policy, it's a history of the Australian Labor movement, by and large.
It really is. I mean, we go back to Menzies at the UAP. Now, he was very sympathetic to European Jews, particularly those in Germany, making their way to this country. But he couldn't, because he knew it would work against him, that there would be saying, they're coming to take our jobs, you know, all this sort of stuff.
Well, they were doing that in North Queensland about people coming over to cut cane and et cetera, et cetera. Right, yeah. So this is what the history is, right? But you can't just say, I don't think it's politically sensible to tell people, look, you're just wrong. What you've got to say is, what are your concerns, and deal with their concerns, because not dealing with their concerns at all is how you get One Nation. Right?
But it's difficult, Jack, because a lot of the stuff is irrational, right? So when we are talking about xenophobia, that's essentially I'm scared of something that isn't particularly real, right? I'm scared that my children will have Asian faces and all this sort of nonsense, you know. So how do you deal with that? You know, it's like Barack Obama once said, you know, if I want to negotiate with you and he was standing giving a speech in front of a rostrum, and I say, this is a rostrum, but you say it's an elephant, what hope do you have of having any sort of reasonable discourse?
Well, I think Malinowskis, who is a very important person in the Australian Labor Party at the moment, he's the kind of
he's muscular, Jack. He's a muscular guy.
How would I put it? He's kind of the Neville Wran of his time, right? The state leader who can speak across the aisle a little bit and who can speak to the wider community. He said that, what did he say? There's a two-pronged strategy to address the anxieties of One Nation voters: an economic response aimed at urgently boosting housing, and a societal response framed around a kind of a joint pride in our national identity. And I think that's exactly the right approach.
Yeah, I can't see anything wrong with that at all. He has spoken to the Australian, I think to Pembo, about the need for the left to embrace patriotism. Doesn't mean jingoism. It means a bit of pride in the country and what it's about. But we often struggle, Jack, don't we? When we start talking about Australian values, people start getting very confused. I would think the fundamental Australian value is fairness. In difficult economic times, it's very hard to sell that idea of fairness because people are saying, well, I've been unfairly treated for a long time. Whether they have or not, it's another question.
An old Labor Party pal of mine, we would never have been factional allies. He's a sort of from the other side of Labor. But he used to always tell me this years ago, that the way you measure patriotism or cultural strength in a country is what happens to the immigrants who arrive. And he said he never worries about that too much because in Australia, the cultural strength is there. And in those days, he was teaching in inner urban schools that were mainly full of migrant kids. And he said, they've been there 6 months and they're as Aussie as the Aussie kids, right? Because the culture is that strong. We'll get to Europe later. That's their problem. Their culture is not strong.
I accept that. Yeah, I do accept that. That there is a process that governments need to be involved in, but also communities in embracing new arrivals, new citizens, and those citizens in turn embracing the place that they live in.
Yes. We used to call them new values. Australians. We used to call them new Australians,
even though we can't quite settle on what they might be. But there's a lot of Hanson is one of the worst, of course. I mean, she's constantly draping herself in the flag and all this sort of stuff. So there is patriotism and patriotism, right? And patriotism, in my view, is a sort of deep-seated pride in one's country, but a full acknowledgement that mistakes have been made along the way. This draping yourself, using the flag as a cape and all this sort of stuff, I mean, it's got a use-by date on it, let's face it. It just becomes hollow. I mean, one thing you sent me yesterday was, and I haven't included this today. We might have a look at it next week. Bit of a non-story, a bit of a New Zealand story. They rejected a flag, which actually was a really good-looking flag. I thought it would have been very good for them, but they rejected that and went with the old Union Jack in the corner and the 4 red stars that look so similar to the Australian flag.
10 years ago this week it was.
If you tell people that the Australian flag was the blue ensign, as it's known, was not it was not the flag under which Australian soldiers fought in World War II, they look at you like you're mad. They pretty much think that Captain Cook stuck the blue ensign in the sand at Botany Bay, and that's where it's been ever since. So yeah, there's patriotism and patriotism, I think.
Well, Australians have historically not been all that comfortable with the flag waving version thereof.
Well, the Howard government changed a fair bit of that, didn't they?
Yeah, but I think the Australians are comfortable. We used to call the migrants in the post-war years New Australians. We had a name for it. That you were not Dutch or a German or Italian. You were a New Australian, right? But that wasn't just government doing that. That was society as a whole saying, we're all in this together.
All right. It's a lot harder. I did see Hanson was quizzed by I think Daily Telegraph journalists about 5 undeclared flights she's had with on Gina Reinhardt's private jet, Jack, and she said it didn't cost the taxpayer anything. And you go, well, didn't it? Because you've just taken 5 flights that you haven't recorded in your parliamentary register, and what's the quid pro quo? Anyway, so these are the sorts of questions he's going to have to deal with. But I think sort of personal attacks of Hansen are not going to work.
No.
You've got to pull them apart. Barnaby Joyce was there. He's a sort of bouncer for her now. Whenever there's a question put that she's going to struggle with, the difference I see between that sort of extreme right movement in Europe and the UK with reform, etc., and we'll talk about the Danes shortly. Well, let's keep the US out of it. The difference I see there is that Farage, for want of a better term, is a fairly new phenomenon, Farage and reform. But One Nation, this is old in Australia. This has been going on for 2 decades. That's why I think it's been up and down, and I just think that's going to be the problem. These are not new faces or new ideas, Jack. All righty.
No.
Albo and Tony Burke went into the one of Sydney's
Lakemba.
the Lakemba Mosque. That's what it was. Yeah, thank you very much. And copped a bit of a razzing, Jack. This is all just fair play, isn't it? That's one of the things that is peculiar about Australian democracy, Jack. That when we do see our political leaders, we tend to make our thoughts pretty well known about them.
Do you remember the 2003 Rugby World Cup? John Howard got a rousing reception when he handed over the cup at Stadium Australia.
Yes, he did. And he didn't like it very much, and he never did it again.
He didn't.
I remember Hawkey handing out the AFL, might have been the VFL premiership at the time, and he copped a booing, and
he wouldn't
that
have
was kind of
enjoyed that.
He was on the dais after that, but he never handed anything out. He wasn't standing in front of a microphone. It's the worst thing you can do.
There was one of my favourites from way back, 1974. Gough Whitlam's at a rugby league test match in Brisbane, right? The Australian Kangaroos playing England. And he's there with Senator Ron McAuliffe, who was, I think, on the board of the Queensland Rugby Union, and a Labor senator, and a big man who is a big figure in Queensland Labor politics. And by this stage in 1974, the Whitlam government's well and truly on the nose. So Gough, they were doing everything except for throw tomatoes at him during his little speech. And as they walked off, he said, Whitlam said to McAuliffe, if I'd known how unpopular you were in your own state, I wouldn't have bothered coming. You know?
Well, I reckon Hawkey would have done the same. I'm not quite sure. I'm going to say about 77 was a drawn grand final, but it would have obviously been 83 or a bit later than that. And Hawke was genuinely mystified as to why people were booing him. Yeah. It was a colossal blow to the ego, and as I say, he never handed out another trophy ever again. Maybe a bit of park cricket or something like that, but that was about it. All right. Let me scroll through the long stuff on the South Australian election and move on to other topics.
The ABC strike?
No, the ABC's 24-hour strike. The first thing I'd say about that is it seems like the 4,500 employees of the ABC around the country are pretty close to a deal. Now, one of the bugbears is that what's been offered is ever so slightly below Australia's inflation rate at the moment. And we know that's going to go up because of matters in Iran, etc. So they might be sort of close to that. The deal that was put to them by management was 10% over 3 years. It's broken down 3.2 1 year, 3.5, etc. And that comes on against a 4.5% increase that the MEAA put forward. There was initially a 5.5% increase put forward by the MEAA, but only about a quarter of ABC employees are members of the MEAA. I know there are some of their big ABC personalities like David Marr. They're big fans of the MEAA. I'm not, and I think I've explained why I'm not a while back. wanted me to do some freelance work for them and were going to pay me. I said, hang on, you're a trade union movement and you want me to work for nothing? Do you want me to introduce concepts of slavery and feudalism to you? And so that was my one serious contact with the MEAA. So, look, it was
anybody who's been in and around the union movement for any length of time will tell you that they are just about the worst employers in the country. The unions themselves.
Yeah, okay, yeah. In terms of behaviour in the workplace
and fairness to their employees, right? Notoriously bad.
Look, I can just tell you my own story about the MEAA. I think they're fairly close to coming to an arrangement, but I think, all jokes aside, it was a nice opportunity to have a crack at the ABC in a column yesterday. But all jokes aside, it's not a good time to be cutting your news services, and it's not a good environment to do it anyway, because people have many, many more alternatives at their disposal.
I saw a comment this morning on social media. Can we have the BBC service on full time and get rid of ABC 24?
So many people commenting on my piece said exactly the same thing, how pleased they were to see the BBC World Service, which, Jack, is under threat at the moment. The BBC World Service, if you're ever driving home in the wee hours of the morning, perhaps after having a little kip before driving, after consuming alcohol, it's a good friend to have on the radio. Is the BBC World Service.
I was just concerned that a lot of the ABC employees might have had to go into the office specially so that they could walk out.
Well, there was a bit of cheering going on. I mean, I've never really understood this, and I think I briefly held union membership when I was pulling beers as a 19 or 20-year-old and haven't done so since. But I've never really understood why you'd be on strike and then go into work but just wait outside. I don't understand that at all. If you're going to go on strike, you go and have a lunch.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I've been as a member of quite a few unions, probably for the longest with the Federated Clerks in the lawyer days. They used to sort of cover lawyers.
They were a right-wing outfit, weren't they?
But they were until
not the shoppies, but out there with the shoppies.
Until Lindsay Tanner took them over, which is when I joined. I joined as part of that campaign to wrest control of the Federated Clerks away from the right. So Lindsay, I think I inherited Lindsay's office in the law firm I went to, and when he went to the Federated Clerk's office.
Look,
I don't recall we went on
used
strike.
to call them super unions, but we've only got a handful of unions now, and they've absorbed all these small unions too. So we've got presumably the Federated Clerks would be split between the AWU, Jack, I guess the CPSU, possibly. All these sort of mega unions are around, and it made perfect sense. I mean, God only knows what happened to the Federated Clerks Union by now. Are there any clerks left?
A lot of them are gone. The Stormont and Pack, the Stackers and Whackers, we used to call them.
Stormont and Packers. Yeah, Bill Lander, you mate.
The MISOs, the Miscellaneous Workers Union. They're all gone. When I first started in the law,
they'll just take anybody, presumably.
Yeah, they put me in the industrial relations section of the law firm, right? And I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be fighting the big end of town, all that kind of stuff. And after about 6 months, I added it all up, and I discovered that I'd spent 65% of my time fighting other unions or other factions within the unions we acted for. And I thought, this is terrible. That's what it was all about, right? And it's also why they're terrible employers.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just looking for a name, but look, this is our next story, the Iran walk. Jack, can I just read to you part of the testimony from the National Security Advisor? Help me out with a name here, please.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard. Gee whiz, another bright spark in the administration there. this is what she said, Jack. As a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, and listeners, we might remember that was the attack on the bunker bomb strikes from the United States in June of last year on Iran's nuclear capabilities. This is what she said. As a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated. This is exactly what Trump said. There has been no effort since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. The entrances to the underground facilities that were bombed have been buried and shuttered with cement. We continue to monitor for any early indications on what position the current or any new leadership in Iran will take with regard to authorising a nuclear weapons program. Now, we all know that things are probably a little messy in terms of getting communiques and messages to the president from his own executive. But here's a person saying that the nuclear threat, if properly communicated to Trump, was not an issue in the start of the war. So we're still sort of wondering why it happened, when it happened. There was a report in the Australian today that I read indicating that the Iranian regime is kind of on its knees, and that would be lovely. But again, I can't see regime change as an objective. There's still perhaps even more talk of boots on the ground, Jack, around Karg Island.
There are thousands of Marines on their way.
2,500 sort of a strike force. There are 24-hour, apparently 24/7 available to strike wherever around the world. Karg Island. I'm sorry, I'm only laughing because I just took a look at Karg Island on the map, and it's kind of up until very recently. It was kind of a holiday place, you know. You'd presumably catch a ferry across there. They got laser tag, or they did have. They got laser tag in. Just noticed this from Google Maps. Yeah,
is there room for a golf course?
Well, they're going to have to knock a few tanks down first, but yeah. Boots on the ground would be an ominous development, I would think. Are we closer to a peace? This is a question, I guess. Are we closer to a peace this week than we were last?
I think we probably are, but I mean, I don't think anyone knows for sure. This is a peculiarly difficult war to get information about because the Iranian information sources have by and large shut down, right? In a way that they haven't been most recently. And so I think it's a bit hard to be sure, but I think we probably are getting closer to a resolution.
This is not a television war, Jack, is it?
No. Well, it's television war from one side only, right? Which never gives you a very accurate picture.
Yeah, you don't really, you can't know in a sense what's going on within the Iranian regime. Of course, Trump has taken two people off the list that were due for assassination as senior figures in the Iranian regime, and those people apparently are subject to conversations or negotiations.
Yes,
but the trouble is around Trump saying we're negotiating. We put a deal to them, and the Iranians say no, you haven't.
Yeah,
and we haven't spoken at all. So it's hard to know.
Yeah, and
both sides, they got some fairly competent bullshitters working for them.
And this is unsurprising in these circumstances that we don't really know. I wouldn't really expect that we would,
Well, the Straits of Hormuz, Jack, were currently you wouldn't call it deadlocked because Chinese, Russian shipping is getting through. Japanese shipping has been permitted to go through by the Iranians. Yep. Apparently, they just have to notify them, and as long as the Iranians, or as long as their credentials check out, off they go. We're seeing in Australia I really pity the people who have to travel around. My son-in-law just dropped his trailer up here. He's on his way to Ulladulla and then back to Goulburn and places like that. But it's currently sitting around about $2.50 for unleaded petrol. Diesel is a bit scarcer, and the sort of crowding at petrol stations isn't really happening, according to people I speak to in Sydney and Melbourne. I know that Tony Abbott was interviewed today saying it's a disgrace that Labor is not looking at expanding our petrol or oil stores, while war continues and the Straits of Hormuz is choking a lot of shipping, with a lot of shipping owners saying we're just not going to go through there. I mean, we might be happy to pay the increased premium, but it's super dangerous. And so we do have these economic problems. I looked at some economic forecasters in the United States taken collectively, and they put forward a good, medium and bad scenario. Both the medium and bad scenarios, Jack, include a global recession for about 8 quarters.
Yes.
The best.
I've read some of that. Yeah,
yeah. The best. I mean, look, it is a bit of tea leaf reading, I suppose. But these are capable people, and they are able to mathematically look at what's changing and how that will impact on consumption and spending, etc. The two scenarios, medium and bad, are extremely bad. Should Australia be looking at stockpiling more oil, Jack? Should we be opening up new refineries? I mean, we're starting to get into the business of nationalisation here, aren't we?
I think if you mean, do I think the government should run these things? No. The answer
should they invest in building them?
Or should they create the conditions where oil companies would want to do it? Right.
I think that's the difficult part, Jack. Unless you pony up with a few bill, they're going to say, well, why would we want to build a refinery in Australia?
Yeah, unless you make it plain that there will be
we just closed 4 of them in the last 10 years, Yeah, they don't make any economic sense to us. So
that of course may change if whether they make economic sense might change depending on what the transport capacity around is. It might make more sense to have more stuff here, but that's to be worked out. I don't think this is the moment for the government to be saying, well, in the midst of this conflict, we're going to be able to foresee our needs and what the international trade outlook will be, so we should make a decision this week about whether we build an oil refinery or oil storage.
It's so unknown, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, just for the benefit of our listeners, we might remember the long drought of 2007, 2006, 2007, a little bit into 2008. And a number of states bought into desalination plants, which are incredibly carbon intensive. And so we have a desalination plant we don't need.
One in Melbourne and one in Sydney.
Funded and designed and so forth on the back of what was essentially sort of panic-driven policy.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's, I think, what the government needs to avoid doing now. You're going to be throwing billions of dollars away into something that the market doesn't need, the suppliers don't want, and then it might just be huge white heffalumps on our coastal ports somewhere.
They felt like they had to build the desal plants because they had to be seen to be doing something. And when you're doing something because you have to be seen to be doing something,
because we'll be able to do something. This is it.
Yeah.
This is something.
When you're doing that, the chances that you are making a good decision are not very high.
All right. Just very briefly, Jack, because I'm not across this, the role of Pakistan. I mean, I would think that the US, I would like to think that the US is using Pakistan as a back channel to Iran. Is that the case? And what's going on with the Saudis' relationship with Pakistan?
Well, the Saudis had a relationship with Pakistan, a mutual defence pact, right? In return for the Saudis, I think lending some extraordinary amount of money to Pakistan, knowing that they probably wouldn't get it
Keep
back.
Imran Khan locked up.
Yeah. That in return for that, they would have a mutual defence pact that went all the way to using the Pakistani nuclear threat, right? And the Saudis have been making noises, it seems, to Pakistan saying, well, you haven't kept your end of the bargain here, and we'll ask for the money back, right? We'll want the money back, right? And Pakistan pretty clearly doesn't have the money to give them back.
No, imagine that's the problem.
So they're in but they also have a kind of a close relationship with Iran. They have, they share. Pakistan has a lot of Shia Muslims, etc., etc. So they're kind of in the middle a little bit in this, and I suspect that's why they're being used by the Iranians and by the US as a sort of a conduit.
There was a sort of unexplained attack from the Pakistan army into Afghanistan about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Jack, with a significant loss of life. And when the Pakistanis were asked what was going on, they very obscure sort of answers.
They sent millions of people who hold Afghanistan citizenship back to Afghanistan. Right, not long ago. So the relationships between Afghanistan and Pakistan are pretty fractious. Pretty fractious.
Yeah. Look, we'll move on because we are quickly running out of time. But look, some elections in Germany and in France and in Denmark are showing a further rise to the right-wing party. I would suggest that the AfD are probably the most problematic of the lot. What happened there, Jack, on the weekend?
This is in Germany and in France. Really strong results for the AfD and for the various parties of the right in France. Right, almost everywhere around Europe where there are elections, this is happening. The only exception really is in Denmark.
Of the three, yeah. So in Denmark, the Social Democrats, centre-left party, have been re-elected, but you know they amended a lot of their policies to make them perhaps more centre-right.
Yeah, they did.
Particularly around immigration.
It's the only place where there hasn't been an immigration party of the right that's been successful. The immigration party of the right's less than 10%, and there's nowhere else, I don't think, in Europe where that could be said. And in part, that seems to be because the centre-left party has said, right, well, we do have problems with crime. And crime committed by migrants, and they actually keep the stats, and the stats do show that. And we have a problem with immigration generally, because Denmark is not a polyglot society. It's a very homogenous place. Right?
I was watching an Instagram account, a very well-travelled fellow. That's the whole basis of his thing, and he'll go to places like Afghanistan and, poverty tourism, you might want to call it. But he was saying, just after he arrived in Denmark, he said, that is the hardest country I've found to get into. He obviously, it's not just a matter of just getting off the plane, showing a passport. He was subject to an intense amount of questioning about what he was up to.
Yes, yeah. But look, I've had British friends who've gone to Denmark to live, and it's not a welcoming place.
Yeah, that's essentially what this traveller was saying. The one to watch, Jack. We're still a couple of weeks away, so we'll talk about it next week and possibly the week after. Is the Hungary centre-right opposition, the TISA party, is well on track to knock over Viktor Orban in early April, the 12th of April.
So
that's a significant one, isn't it? And you really do get the sense that Orban's sort of had stayed his welcome. And that is one of those things that's sort of, well, it's subject to politics, it's subject to political dissatisfaction, but it would go against the sort of trends that we're talking about. So that's one to watch. I mean, if Tisa is elected, then I think that would be a rare moment of joy for the Ukrainians, at least. All righty.
Have you been following the saga of the missing phone in the UK?
No. Oh, yes, I have. Yes, I know a little bit about it, but please tell. You'll know more.
This is the phone belonging to Morgan McSweeney, who was Keir Starmer's chief of staff. And Morgan McSweeney is an old protege of Peter Mandelson, right? And it seems, although Starmer's not answering this, that Morgan McSweeney was instrumental in the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, right? There are various things going, a committee hearing, etc., going on, trying to find out just how it came to be that Peter Mandelson was appointed to the job, despite the fact that he was a known friend of Jeffrey Epstein, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And Morgan,
I don't think there's any real doubt about Starmer's involvement in terms of
it's just
brushing
a question
aside the advice that he received. Should be right, mate. Off you go.
Yeah. He has made statements in the House that if they were contradicted, would make it hard for him to hang on. I think it's fair to say, because he hasn't got much support from his own party.
Got strong fingernails. I think we can say that about him. Yeah. He knows how to cling on, or he has been able to cling on.
Has up until now.
A little bit of polling from the UK. This is a YouGov poll taken over 3 or 4 days ago over the weekend, basically. There are some interesting things here, Jack. Labor's up by 2. To 19. They were in the 40s before the last election. Reform is down 2 to 23. Now, it wasn't that long ago they were in the 30s, in the low 30s. So there's been a significant run against them. Yes. And I think there's some real pressure coming their way in terms of Farage's performance and what have you. I did see he was harassed by protesters. He didn't enjoy it very much. While I could go on with this, Greens are at 18% in the UK. That's -1. So there's an alternate left thing going on there. I didn't realise until I just saw these figures that the Greens were as high as they are. The Conservatives are at 17, which is where they were in the previous poll. And the Lib Dems are at about 13, and they're sort of around 12, 13, 14, generally speaking. Yeah, so that's a big trend. I think that if we look at trends there, reform has really come off the boil.
Well, if you look at those numbers and you understand that it's a first past the post voting system, this is really a dartboard show. You know, you're gonna have to look at individual seats, and you're going to end up with a mess, right? Just before we leave Mr. McSweeney's phone, he says the phone was stolen from his hand as he walked out of a restaurant, right? And
God, don't they do something about their crime rates, Jack?
Yeah, and it's an iPhone, and he says because of that, all his WhatsApp messages, etc., are unrecoverable, right? And this is being believed about as much as you would expect it to be.
Yeah. It sounds like a very convenient act of theft for a start. It is a bit of an issue. When you get to London, or when I was there just recently, the cabbies will tell you, please don't walk around with your phone in your ear. You will get knocked off. But when we look at crime rates in the UK, they're actually down, including things like, sort of brazen theft of phones. I mean, it is an issue for the country, or particularly around London, but their crime rates are down, and particularly in London, quite significantly. Anyway, so it would seem unlikely the stats say that the phone may have got lost some other way. I just wanted to what was
her name?
On this, Jack? Go on.
Rebecca Vardy. Remember the court case involving Rebecca Vardy and Vardy and I can't think of the other football as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and she lost her phone because she and a friend went on a paddle on a boat, and the damn thing fell out of her pocket and jumped overboard. I've got to say,
yeah, that was a wonderful defo trial there.
Yeah,
very
Morgan
entertaining.
McSweeney should have had a paddle on the Serpentine or something, and lost his
sounds a bit
phone.
more likely. Very quickly, Jack, it's quite a significant issue. This there have been two major court cases that have been described, certainly in the New York Times and elsewhere, as Meta, which is the overarching company of Facebook, etc., at Facebook, Instagram, etc., is that Meta is facing its big tobacco moment, Jack. And what that means is that there are multiple suits coming their way that would indicate that they deliberately attracted young people to some very dark places and some very dark people. So there has been a case just resolved where Meta must pay $4.2 million in combined compensatory and punitive damages, and YouTube, which is Google-owned, must pay $1.8 million. This is a case brought by a now 20-year-old woman identified only as KGM. And she accused social media companies of creating products as addictive as cigarettes or digital casinos, citing features like infinite scroll and algorithmic recommendations. KGM sued successfully. And this comes on another case in New Mexico where Meta has been found liable for violating state law by failing to safeguard users of its apps from child predators. And that jury decided on Tuesday that Meta should pay $375 million. And as I say, there is an enormous backlog of cases against Meta in particular in the United States, Jack. Big tobacco. It's an interesting sort of metaphor, isn't it?
It is.
Poor old Zuck, he's just shaking his head. He doesn't quite know what hit him. But this really could bring a lot of this stuff to heel. Mentioned in a lot of the reporting is that Australia has moved to ban people under the age of 16 from social media, and I had some mixed feelings about that. But the longer I thought about it, and the more I look at the evidence that these companies have misbehaved in the first instance, I think it's actually quite a good move, and I think it'll be very productive once the sort of kids who are around about 7 or 8 now get into their 12s, 13s, 14s, and they just won't have access. As it stands now, you'll find kids that are 16, 15 and so forth, they'll still be getting around in the net. At the same time, Jack, for those who look like their pornography, they're finding that they're going to have to provide the pornography's provider, Pornhub and places like that, they're going to have to essentially approve their adulthood one way or another on these porn sites. And again, I've got no problem with any of this.
My instinctive reaction to these things when they're first raised is to say this is a parenting matter, not a.
That's probably where I started. Yeah,
yeah. But I won't go any further than to say that's an instinctive reaction, and I'm open to persuasion about something else, but I'm not there yet.
The thing that stuck with me is this young bloke said to me, and he's in his early 20s now, and he said to me, yeah, it was a wild time. He said, going from, I feel like I went from between the ages of 12 and 18 in 2 weeks. And that can't be healthy. And we're finding out more and more that it's not. And I reckon, poor. I really don't like Mark Zuckerberg. So anything that's going to cause him some grief, I'm all for.
Yeah, I join you there. I'm just trying to think of. So if you go from 12 to 18 in a couple of weeks, I just think back what an idiot I was at 13, 14, 15, 16 and 17.
And have that multiply.
Yeah,
have you at 12 and a half years of age with you, assuming that you have this adult knowledge and wisdom. It's just a disaster. I mean, just.
Oh no, I was thinking if you go from 12 to 18, you might miss out on all those idiot years, in the middle.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of screen looking, but I mean, just the psychosexual development stuff, Jack. It's pretty scary. And these are multiple generations that we've allowed to go through this. And it's a bit like I was talking the other day. And look, you're more across the AI legal stuff than I am. But if we knew then, when social media first popped up in the late 90s, the great harm that it was going to do, particularly young people, then we would have regulated the hell out of it. But it was just waved through and off you go.
Perhaps.
All right. We're moving on to sport. Well, let's just start with the NRL, Jack. What have we got on tonight? Sea Eagles play the Roosters. Tomorrow, the Warriors are going pretty well up against the West Tigers. And I guess, as I said before, the Broncos are the ones that seem to be in a little bit of strife. And that seems to be going on to off-field areas now. And I think one of their coaching staff was showing the door for not presenting a unified front, they're second. Third. Crikey! The Broncos have now had. They've had one win, and they sit fifth bottom. Not bad. Not great for the reigning premiers. And the Warriors are going beautifully, as are the Panthers, the Bulldogs and the Storm. West Tigers doing okay early on with a couple of points, with a couple of wins, I should say. A lot of talk about, moving on to AFL, a lot of talk about Essendon, Jack. It strikes me as exceedingly premature to be talking about disastrous seasons. And, of course, there's an entire industry in Melbourne, based in Melbourne, that, they need to fill airtime and podcasts and what have you with, dramatic sort of tones they need to sort of cut in there. It's almost like a cannibalisation what goes on in Melbourne over the AFL.
I can't believe
they weren't flash on the weekend, but look, they are going through a rebuilding exercise. Now, a lot of Essendon barrackers will say, well, we have been for a long time. It'd probably be similar to Carlton in that respect, but they haven't won a game now. I think something like May 20 will be their, 365-day anniversary since their last win. They haven't played in a final, I think, since about 2003, isn't it? And for one of the prouder Melbourne clubs, they seem to be struggling. But is it too early to be making these calls, Jack?
Yeah, it is. But there's, I can't believe how many talk shows there are on AFL. If you look at, if you search around on YouTube or whatever, everybody's got a talk show on.
I mean, there's 1,000 podcasts. I mean, just from my own Instagram rummaging, I reckon there are about 5 podcasts just devoted to the Carlton Footy Club. They're not, it's not within the club. It's just supporters and members.
Around there. Yeah. One thing that interested me this week was that was some discussion about, is it okay? I mean, as a few of the clubs, Hawthorn did this, Geelong do it now, where everybody keeps their pay level relatively low so that they can win something, right? And other clubs are happy to say, well, look, we want 1 or 2 players and we'll pay them over the odds, and they'll be paid much, much more than their teammates, and we'll try and get away to a win that way. And they're quite different approaches, and they have both worked in a sense. But is there a right or wrong way to do that?
If you do the big signings, I mean, the one that's going around at the moment is Zach Bailey, who is coming up with free agency. at the end of this season. And he's a very talented small forward. He plays at Brisbane. He's a multiple premiership player there. He's looking at sort of earning maybe a $1.6 million per year type contract. And he's a small forward, Jack. He's not always involved. It's a lot of money for a small forward, put it that way.
Yeah. So St Kilda spent a lot of money on Tom de Koning and who was the other fellow, and on Messiah Wanganeen Miller.
Well, that was the first one because he was looking at going back to South Australia. So we can't let that happen. He's emotionally driving the club at the moment. They had that extraordinary win against Melbourne. We're almost
so they pay up, right? So they've
you've got to do. You've got no choice. You've got to do that.
Yeah,
and then the business with de Koning, well, people I think will always say that they paid a bit too much, but de Koning has got 7 or 8 good years ahead of him. I think he's 25, 26 now. And he will be a very good ruckman for them for a very long time. He played really well in their first win last week.
Yeah, but so Hawthorn faced this challenge with Buddy Franklin, right? Yeah. And they decided that no, they weren't going to match whatever he asked for. He's a free agent, right? They thought he would end up.
What was it? 11 million over 10 years? The Swans.
Yeah, I think it was. And they thought he'll probably go to Greater Western Sydney, and we're not going to match that. We're going to keep all our players on the lower level, get some new ones in. Everyone gets paid a bit less, and they end up winning 3 premierships, right? So they get a check for that. Sydney paid the money for Buddy, right? And I've got to tell you, they got their money's worth out of Buddy for over those 11 years. A hell of a lot of ticket sales.
Marquee player, Jack.
Yeah. Especially in a market like Sydney, you really need something like that.
Yeah. And look, I mean, Charlie Curnow, again, used 3 goes to Swans, copped an enormous amount of criticism. Swans just fell away there against good opposition last week. And look, he's just not clunking his marks, but, he'll get there. I honestly think that's a good signing. And I think it's probably pretty good for both clubs. What we're seeing, of course, Jack, and we talked about the toughest trip in football, and that's looking like the Gold Coast Suns. They look cherry ripe. Early days, only 3 games played. I think. Well, there are still some clubs that will have a bye over the next week. I think Hawthorn will have an 18-day break after round 3.
Yeah, Swans have 16. I think it's ridiculous.
Fix it, please. It's just not working. This opening round stuff is just nonsense. You should be
the West Coast fans on Sunday morning will have to be up at 9:30 to watch the West Coast play in Melbourne, right?
They've got a 12:15 kickoff. In the east. So,
yes. So it's a 9:30.
As dumb as it gets.
Yeah. No, someone at the AFL needs to put their hand up and say, "Look, we got this wrong."
Yeah, I mean, I did see in one of those many AFL type podcasts, they're saying, look, they're actually, well, I would call it perhaps indiscreetly shitting in their own nest, and that's, basically AFL administrators are toying with a superb product to the point where people are starting to drop off. It'll be interesting to see if that's the case. I think maybe when the season settles. Good game tonight, Jack. Geelong and Adelaide in Geelong. I mean, I always sort of argue that the Cats have a bit of an advantage as well, playing 7 games, 7 home games at GMHBA Stadium. But it should be a cracker. And then Collingwood and the Giants. Giants just seem to be a little bit off, Jack, since their first round win. And the Saints had a good one, but they've got their work cut out for them against the Lions this weekend.
Just a tip for the Giants. I haven't seen the whole movie, but I've seen clips of it. I think the coach needs to yell at these blokes a bit more.
Yeah, I think he would have had a bit of a yell last couple of weeks. Essendon play North Melbourne at Marvel on Saturday night.
That's the marquee game on Saturday night, I've got to tell you.
Yeah, well, you're right. The Fremantle Richmond game, which isn't a marquee game much either, that's it's a 4 o'clock 4:15. Well, that game will start in if these are Eastern times, so that game will start at 1:15 in Freo.
Perth. Yeah.
Well, in Perth, yeah, the Optus Stadium. So that's just not working out. Yeah, and then we got the Sunday 12:30 game for the Eagles, who had a pretty good go against North Melbourne, had a win, so they've chalked up a win. And again, if Essendon beat North Melbourne on Saturday night, I reckon just about even money. You know, all this noise just goes away.
Yeah. Look, people are as inclined to get overexcited about the Suns as they are to get over pessimistic about the Bombers. I mean, I look at the Suns and say, gee, I'd be surprised if they're not top four, but it's only a couple of games. Yeah.
They should be a top four. So I think Sydney are, and I think the Western Bulldogs are. But it's early days.
Yeah,
Western
early
Bulldogs
days,
are going really well too, and they look cherry ripe. There's not too many weaknesses there. So the Adelaide Crows have won one, lost one. They look to be thereabouts. They're going to be very, very hard to beat in Adelaide. God forbid. When does the gather round? It's always around Easter, isn't it? So we've got an early Easter this year. So I think Carlton play Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval, and I'm not expecting great things to happen there, but we will see.
The cricket,
yes, this is important, Jack. Before
the England Cricket Board have decided no change to keep Rob Key, Baz McCullum and Stokesy in their jobs, and this is not being well received in the press and in the social media as well in the UK.
Well, Jeffrey Boycott's had a whinge, but he normally
has a whinge about everything. Yes,
but Michael Vaughan, there's a podcast he's involved in, and I saw or read a little bit of that, or heard a little bit of that. Seems like Vaughan's more across what England cricket needs than Rob Key, for example.
Yes.
And Vaughan, he sort of blotted his copybook. I don't know if you remember the Oxford racism. That's not Oxford. Yorkshire. Sorry, thank you. Yorkshire racism scandal, and I think he sort of blotted his copybook a little bit there. Just reminds me of a magnificent little exchange with a Yorkshireman, and he was quoting Jeffrey Boycott, and a mate of mine said, Boycott's a bastard and he's a wife beater, and this Yorkshireman said, he said, I don't do the accent, I won't do the accent. He goes, that woman Jeffrey Boycott beat wasn't his wife.
Okay. Just while we're on cricket, remember the start of the IPL 2008. Shane Warne, who was pretty much a washed-up cricketer at this stage, he gets picked up by the Rajasthan Royals.
Well, he'd retired. He'd retired from international.
He'd retired, right? Yeah, but he gets drafted by the Rajasthan Royals, right, for X amount of rupees, right? Yeah. He cuts a deal with the franchise to say, I'll play for $500,000 US a season, right? But you give me 0.75% of the franchise for every year I play for you. So he plays for 4 years. He's got 3% of the Rajasthan Royals. It sold this week, and that 3% is worth $50 million US.
Ooh. He's a bright spark, our Warnie. So look, I did want to also add, I'm a big fan of Cricinfo, which is Peter Lawler and Gideon Hay and others contributing on cricket and a fair bit there. Just have a look, listeners. Buy yourself a free Imran Khan T-shirt. That the boys from Cricket at Al have put out, and profits will be donated to charities. But yes, Gideon was reporting that he went to the Junction Oval to watch the Sheffield Shield final get underway. We'll briefly cover that in a minute. And this bloke who he knows played cricket against for a long period of time, he got punted from the ground because he was wearing a free Imran Khan T-shirt. He's there. He's photographed with another T-shirt on top of it. They finally let him in, and it was Cricket Australia officials, according to Gideon, who said, "Well, we can't have that. That's all a bit inflammatory." I can't believe these guys.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you think of Imran Khan, but they're telling a bloke you can't wear a T-shirt on. That's ridiculous.
In St Kilda, the Junction Oval, gee whiz. So,
lovely ground, the Junction Oval.
Beautiful ground. So where we are now with the Sheffield Shield final, Victoria looked to be very strong. They're obviously hosting it. They had a great season. I think they lost 2 games. They won 7 outright. South Australia battling a little bit early days. The match has been delayed due to rain. And of course the Victorians will love all that. They're 3 for 55 with Alex Carey on 11 not out. Jason Sanger got a blob. And Scotty Boland took, was it the first wicket? Yeah, he's got 1 for 19 off 9, usual stuff, but very, very slow going for the South Australians, and they must win outright for
to win the Shield.
To win the Shield, yeah. So Victoria looked to be in good shape. I saw Scotty Boland interviewed. He said, I think it's his 100th Shield game, this final, and he said, it's just around the place. He's played in 6 finals now, apparently. So one hell of a good cricketer, that man. All right, Jack, I think you've got something for us just to take us out.
Oh, this story was irresistible. This happened in the United States. A Fox 10 article. A quadruple amputee cornhole player was accused of shooting a man to death. Now, are you familiar with cornhole?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Well, I think it's probably not what you should be talking about on a podcast.
This is a game where you have a board that you throw. That's called cornhole.
They're beanbag sacks. Is that the one?
Yeah, the little beanbag sacks, and you've got to throw it at the board, and you get a point for hitting the board, and you get 3 points or 4 points for getting it through the hole. Right?
Yeah. I've seen it played. They throw them from about 15 metres away.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a game they play like at what they call tailgates and stuff like that. Where you have a bit of a barbecue and a booze up before a game, before a college football game or whatever.
Right.
Anyway, this fella's 27 and he's a professional cornhole player. And I've got to tell you, the Americans will make anything into a professional sport. They have professional contests in parallel parking.
But this bloke.
He's a quadruple amputee, and he shot this bloke. Right?
So how does he fling it? How does he throw the sandbag?
Well, first of all, how does he drive the car? Because he's driving.
Right. We can work that out. Yeah. I presume he's not driving himself to the ground.
No, he's the driver. He's a quadruple amputee, and he's the driver. But not only is he driving the car, he has a dispute with the bloke in the passenger seat, and he shoots him and kills him.
Oh,
and he wants the other passengers to help him get rid of the body, and they don't. So he drops the bloke. They get out in Scarpa, right? So he drives somewhere else. Yeah, he drives somewhere else and dumps the body. I mean, look, as a story,
you've got to must have been charged by now.
Yeah, he has. As a story, you've got to say this is fabulous, right?
Good Lord, the court case alone should be worth the price of admission.
Yeah,
good stuff. All right, thank you, Jack. Thank you for your learned opinions today, and we just want to thank our listeners for tuning in, and just that constant reminder. Drop us a line if you want to have. We're sort of trying to move a little bit away from sort of just raw coverage of news. And we'd like to have a chat about, political affiliations, where you come from, how it drove you, that sort of stuff. Be good stuff to listen to. How you became the sort of political being that you are today. And any thoughts, of course, on media and whether they're failing, whether social media is a disgrace that should be shut down. Personally, I'm all for it, although I'd miss Instagram. So drop us a line and let us know all of those things. And, we'd love to hear from you. All right, folks. Well, that's the end of show 150, recorded on the 26th of March, 2026. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week. See you, folks.